So I'll go ahead and give some quick introduction of myself and the panel. They're cleaning the microphones here for the rest here, but the panel here is going to be talking about the world's first safety standard that's been developed for VR, AR, and XR. And this is highly important information, and there's a lot of companies that are starting to get involved. And you've got like the world's leaders here who are basically forging ahead in territory that's never been done before. So I'll let them introduce themselves in just a second as these microphones get cleaned. But a quick background of myself: I'm Nathan Pettyjohn. I'm the founder and president of the VRARA Association and Immerse Global Summit. I also spent the last 3.5 years at Lenovo, where I was managing the global go-to-market strategy for AR and VR software, hardware solutions. And so I have a really good understanding of how important this is. And it's an honor to be amongst the leaders of the world here that are literally creating the safety standards that we need. So thank you. And perfect timing.
Hot off the light, which is you always.
Yeah. Be safe, please, when you walk up with those microphones.
Thank you.
All right, go ahead, Ibrahim.
Hi, everyone. My name's Ibrahim Jilani. I work for Underwriters Laboratories. It's also known as UL Solutions. We're a third-party testing and certification company, and we've been working in product safety for 128 years.
Stanley. I'm from Design Interactive, and I've spent about 30 years evaluating the physiological impact of immersive technology, and so I am bringing the science to the standards.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jonathan Reeves. Oversee the regulatory and compliance at Magic Leap. Come from about 25 years out of the medical industry and Class 2, Class 3 medical devices, and had the opportunity to join Magic Leap to develop their regulatory and compliance department about 7 years ago.
Great, thank you so much. So I think we have a little bit of information that's going to be showcased and presented here on a couple of slides. So if we can bring those up here, and our panelists are going to talk through some of those. So looks like we've got it on the stage. Perfect.
Perfect. So I'll start off. Let me make sure I get the clicker working. Okay, perfect. So let me walk you guys through what it takes to develop a safety standard. You know, generally speaking, when you look around this room and you see bright lights that are pointing to us, an exit sign that's on the wall there, drywall that's behind the wall, every single one of those products that build a building, they have product safety standards behind them. And it takes industry to write those standards. It takes actually years to develop those standards for an emergency light, for general luminaires, for fire protection of the drywall so that it doesn't burn down the building. Similarly, when we look at head-mounted displays, this was an area that no safety standard in the world was addressing. So just a few years ago, we started seeing that there were some posts by the Consumer Product Safety Commission of the United States asking the manufacturers, hey, you don't have a safety standard for these devices that you've been selling to the consumers. We have a concern about that. And you all saw that and we said, you know what, we think we have a lot of history in consumer products. We have a lot of history with display technologies. Why don't we gather the industry, put our technical experts to work, and try to pull together everyone to write the world's first safety standard in this technology. So on the screen here, as you're seeing all the companies that are actually involved in this, there's a total of 32 companies, of which 29 are voting members of the standard. The standard's number is called UL 8400. So UL 8400 is going to be published next year. And as it gets published, it will become the world's first safety standard for AR, VR, and MR technology. The reason why the three of us are on the panel is you'll see us highlighted in blue. So all three of us are participating in the standard development and actually been meeting regularly since February 2020. So there's been almost 2.5 years, almost 3 years of standard development going on with everybody on this list meeting sometimes twice a month, sometimes more frequent than that. And they can be 2 hours to 4 hour sessions to get into the discussion of what is safety for a head-mounted display. Jonathan, why don't I turn it over to you?
Yeah, the next couple of slides wanted to show just so everybody can get an idea of just all the technology that's actually now being put on the head for the different head-mounted displays. So here's an example of Oculus and HoloLens. And then if you can go to the next slide as well. Here's an example of our device, which I'm, of course, very familiar with. And as you can see on the bottom, we have 18 cameras and sensors that are in intimate location to the head. So for me as a compliance person, and I'd say total in our whole team, we have about 15 work streams that we manage from a compliance standpoint, from electrical safety to lasers, IR LEDs. And they're all great standards, but now the form and function is now putting them very intimately in the head. So it's a challenge for us. Of course, it's our job to provide the safest product. But then putting this technology in a lot of those standards don't quite fit. So it's exciting to see UL step up and want to do this UL 8400 because there's a lot of gaps. So these things then we're able to address in a more complete fashion for our customers.
And here you can see the different areas that the standard addresses. So if you look at the right there, enhancing spatial perception, here you're looking at things such as the legibility of text in the headset or the ambient lighting and the kind of ways that might interact with the environment and cause safety standards. And then in that same box, you see things like the skin compatibility and the thermal heat and burns, things that could go wrong in terms of a safety concern with regard to the interaction with the headset. And then where I've spent a whole lot of time, the visually induced motion sickness. And why that's a safety issue is not the sickness itself, but the kind of after effects it can cause with regard to degraded hand-eye coordination, postural instability, and visual functioning. And so that gets pulled into a safety standard. In the middle there, you see the different aspects of the display itself, such as the visual functions and the flicker. Flicker, you can be worried about things like malaise at high levels and seizures at low levels. IPD is a place I've spent a lot of time on because actually the headset itself can contribute to safety concerns based on the design and how well it fits the anthropometrics of the human. On the right-hand side, you see the biomechanical stress, the mechanical robustness, kind of things that happen when you put this heavy weight on a head and when you start moving around and the kind of stresses it can put on the spine are with these standard addresses. And the mechanical robustness, depending on the environment this headset's used in, the glass could shatter and you could have concerns with regard to safety concerns there. On the lower right-hand side there, you'll see the general safety and warning instructions, such as predispositions a person might have, some kind of conditions they might come to use of the system with that might cause greater safety concerns for them. For example, if you're very susceptible to seizures or migraines or things like that, it could cause issues that would not happen with someone that didn't have those predispositions. And then we look at collision risks, especially when your world is completely occluded from the headset, and those certainly call for things like virtual boundaries to be put in place so that you can not bang into things in the real world. And then laser safety in the middle. So this is kind of an overall summary of the areas that the standard addresses.
Well, I have a lot of questions here to go in depth, but kind of a question for Kay and Jonathan would first be just why was it important for you to get involved in the safety standard? How important is it to you as a company, as you kind of rank a lot of the priorities that are there for you?
I think for my job being, of course, head of compliance and regulatory, when I look at a new product, it's our job to ensure that we bring a product that's safe to the user, right? And as I said prior, a lot of standards that we're addressing may be, applied in different form and function to other products, but now that we're moving to the head-worn mounted displays, it added challenges. So, as we looked at our overall compliance program and we take that, approach, and our team comes from a lot of medical backgrounds, so we kind of have that way that we look at things and seeing the gaps and seeing the things that needed to be addressed because, we have thermals, let's say you have standards that apply thermals, but it's different now that you're into more of a sensitive skin area, you're close to the head, so trying to find opportunities that we can set new criteria. So being involved in 8400 with all the other manufacturers and people like Kay and research and things like that was exciting to kind of bring these people all together to try to fill these gaps as the technology starts to mature, and UL 8400 will give us that opportunity to kind of give us a base to start.
For me, there's just so much science to bring to bear to these standards. And my area has always been human system integration. And 30 years ago, one of the limiting factors for virtual reality was the human factor. And it still is. And so there's just so much that we have to consider to keep people safe. And also the other thing with regard to these headsets, IPD was one of the ranges, one of the criteria that we address. And to me, it's also about accessibility to the technology, because if the IPD range is not how it should be, it actually limits who can use the headset, and it unfairly limits females because our statutes are smaller. And there's a great article in Frontiers, if you want to read it, that talks about how virtual reality is sexist, it doesn't have to be based on the design of the headset. So there's just so much with regard to the potential accessibility and widespread adoption that could be limited by safety concerns, and so we need to get out ahead of it.
Okay, great. So the next question really revolves around, what are some of the unique challenges that you've faced in this ecosystem, like all the different companies you're dealing with? And, we're talking about XR, VR, AR, kind of falls into that wearable technology, and there's so many form factors, so many stakeholders. There's not even a standard on like what's the form factor. And so what has been unique, and Ibrahim, this might be more for you because you've dealt with this in many other areas before, right?
Yeah, so you nailed it. There's been a lot of complexity when we start talking about standard development in this area, because you have occluded headsets, you have visually optically transmitted headsets, and you also have kind of things in between where there's video enhanced headsets. So all of those, it took almost a year to get a table going in the standard that says if you're this type of headset, here's what the requirements are that apply to you. If you're this kind of headset, then there's kind of another list, and so on. So it took a group of manufacturers, a group of stakeholders to kind of go through the list of occluded, non-occluded, optical see-through, visual see-through, and make the right matrix to be able to look at that. And then also to your point about the wearables and head-mounted displays and kind of some of the conversations, one of the biggest contributors in the standard development has actually been the Consumer Product Safety Commission. Even though they're not voting as a member, they have brought 2 or 3 of their experts to come to every meeting. As a matter of fact, some of their commissioners show up sometimes to the meeting, which shocked me because I've been involved with standard development for 17 years, and I've never seen a CPSC commissioner show up to a standard development group. They have staff that do that. And so, if you know anything about how the commissions are structured, it's like you've brought your, the voting member of the commission who can actually make regulation and not make regulation, showing up to see how the high-tech companies are planning, the future of the standard. So I think we're benefiting from the fact that people are putting their ideas together, that a table gets formatted, and as people are, maybe a little bit of storming, they eventually get to the point of some norming where then they can say, okay, well, we're now thinking about these things in common terminologies, common language, and that really helps move the requirements along. Anything to add, guys?
Yeah, I guess to kind of go on what Ibrahim said, I think the challenge at the beginning was we had a lot of different people, a lot of diversity in the technical committee, which is what you want. But as you said, especially from the manufacturers, when you had VR, then you had AR, is trying to organize the standard and everybody come together, because everybody has different interests, right? And the safety criteria is different, and that was a big struggle, and it took a while to kind of develop that table as we went through the clauses on what was applicable and what was not. So that was a challenge, and also looking at everybody has different use cases, right? There's a lot of different environments that the products can be used in, which can change as well what your maybe criteria or what the risks are. So bringing in risk was an important part of the standard, and that's, everybody has a little bit different risk profile based on their use case. So I think that was a challenge to get through, but it was very positive to hear everybody's input, and the diversity, in developing the standard, I think has been a very positive to get a very inclusive start. There's a lot to be done. It's a great start, and as the technology, we get more data, things will improve, but it's a great starting point.
One thing that I thought was important is to have people that didn't have skin in the game as a manufacturer producer. And I think that you all did a really good job of balancing out those who have a vested interest in where the safety standard goes and versus those of us who don't have any skin in the game, and it balanced things out nicely.
Got it. So the next question that I have for you is, it revolves around the consumer, because you deal with all these manufacturers, but ultimately this is safety for the consumer. So how do you gauge the interest from the consumer? What are their safety concerns? And what are those kind of stacked? Maybe what are the top 2 or 3 things that consumers feel like, hey, I'm worried about this. Is it gonna cause dizziness? Is the 5G network that's streaming to a device that's 2 centimeters from my head, is that gonna cause issues? Maybe you could all elaborate on that.
Yeah, I'll maybe take a stab at that. From my perspective, what helped us a lot is there's databases that exist, saferproducts.gov, and then Consumer Product Safety Commission themselves came with a lot of information from things that they've collected from consumers. Certainly, spatial perception was one of the top issues. Spatial perception is especially important when it comes to the occluded headsets, those that kind of block your complete vision, and people forget where they're standing and where they are, and you see lots of injuries, lots of people fall forward or hit the wall. I myself had worn a mixed reality headset, put my finger in the fan because I forgot that the fan was there. I had an aquarium on the roof. It looked real cool, but then the fan was right behind it. So these kind of things with spatial perception is what's one of the critical areas that the standard has, that the committee has been, the panel has been talking about for a number of months. And Kay brought up the fact that the panel has a number of different interest groups. That's actually by design, by intention, that when you have a standard that you're trying to develop, you have to have different various stakeholders, one being the commercial end user, one being the producer, the manufacturer of the equipment, one being the supply chain, one being government or academia. So you try to get everybody from every part of the value chain within industry to take part so that it isn't a heavily manufacturer-driven standard or heavily overly regulated type of standard. You want it to be balanced so everybody's voices are heard.
So from a manufacturer, how do I know the consumer has interest in this? Because my phone rings off the hook every day.
Wow.
So I have constantly people asking, is this device safe? We have customers, we have partners that want to use it and pass it on to their customers. So it's definitely an area where there's an extreme interest. I think people understand the amount of technologies you could see from the pictures earlier, what's on the head, and what are we doing as a manufacturer to ensure safety to our users. So it comes up a lot, and I think that the bigger areas of concern for people are the visual aspects, the thermal, the radiation aspects, lasers, IR LEDs that are shining into lights. How do they know? And that's an area that we're very robust on, or I take a lot of interest in, is the type of things like the lasers, the IR LEDs, the displays, because the potential impact. And there's still data that needs to be developed to really understand that. But yeah, we hear it every day. So
Wow.
It's great to have UL 84 and to kind of start giving some comfort to the user that we're doing, or the industry's developing a standard to try to give them a more comfort
Baseline.
baseline that we're offering safety.
I'm going to just add one other thing that we as a committee have really struggled with that I know the consumer is very interested in, and that's age and what's a safe age. And we definitely are still battling that ground within this committee ourselves. And we know that the consumer really wants a good answer. Unfortunately, the data is very sparse.
Yeah. One of the stakeholders we haven't talked about yet, and we do have a few minutes left here, is like the government regulation. And you're dealing with these devices that are being manufactured all over the world. They're being shipped all over the world. And are there governments that are really taking a stand yet in this XR ecosystem? And maybe who's leading the charge with that you kind of defer to also coordinate with?
Well, in the United States, by far, Consumer Product Safety Commission is the government entity that is taking the lead and also involved with the development of the standard. In the enterprise environment, it would be OSHA. So Occupational Safety Health Administration in the United States cares deeply. Around the globe, though, I have not seen yet an emergence, and maybe Jonathan has seen it from a different perspective, but I have not seen an emergence coming out of different countries saying we want these sets of requirements applied for a wearable headset. But I do think when 8400 gets published, it will go like wildfire across the global world, because there's been a pent-up demand to have a published standard that has requirements talking specifically about head-mounted displays. So we'll see how that plays out. Right now, tentatively, the standard is scheduled to be published in February. It did achieve consensus. It was voted on in August. It achieved consensus. It's got a little bit of redrafting that's going to now go on for another vote. So we think that February will get published. But after that, it'll be interesting to see. It'll be important, like Immerse Global Network and others, what your take will be on the standard as well, because that influences the regulators to take notice of safety of certain standards.
From our side, being a manufacturer, all the compliance to the standards roll up then to the registration of the product in multiple countries. So there is no UL 8400 yet anywhere, but we do see regulatory bodies when we go to the country with our submission package. There are definitely a lot of questions that get asked and deeper into because they haven't seen this device before, and they want to ensure safety. So it's definitely, the world is looking for something, and I think, UL 8400 will be that basis that hopefully will then, start being adopted on a global standpoint. But there's definitely concern as this product comes out, because we sit there and, can spend a lot of time going back and forth with the regulatory bodies, trying to ensure that we have a safe product.
Perfect. And that was the time, and I want to thank you all for leading the charge. This is highly important. It's something that not everybody thinks about all the time with all the cool technology, but thank you. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.